Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara Riska, life coach, wife, and the mother of 4 incredible and unique kids. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I completely lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and grace that once felt so completely lacking. I started the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves up against what feels impossible. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle the dreams that you hold impossible now. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you're a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello, and welcome back to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Today, the episode is going to be the second in a series of 3, talking about habits. And it's a big word. A lot of us think about habits and wish we had the willpower to have better habits. And one of the things that we're going to really be going over today especially is why self-control is not actually the problem of why you're not having habits that you desire. And before we get too far into the episode, I actually want to do a little recap from last week. I want to reiterate that really I have summarized much of what James Clear taught in his book, Atomic Habits, and kind of brought application to us as special needs moms. So if you want a really extensive, longer version of these 3 podcasts, go ahead and pick up his book. It's brilliant. I loved it. And it's all about implementation. It's not about just reading a book. We're going to make sure we have ways to apply the information in this podcast today, especially as a special needs mom. As a little bit of a recap from last week, I want to remind you that habits are not about accomplishing a goal. They're about who you are becoming. And your identity influences your habits more than anything at all. Your identity is who you believe yourself to be. And there are 2 fundamental steps to changing your identity. 1, simply decide the person you want to be. It's that easy. A lot of us have, when we talk about identity, we think about finding out who we already are and like trying to like discover our own identity. Whereas it actually is much more based in deciding who you want to be. And then step 2 is proving it to yourself with small wins. And if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you'll know that one of my favorite words and ideas is practicing. And so this step 2 to changing your identity is all about practice. And lastly, we talked about very briefly at the end, an implementation intention. We're going to talk about it again in this week's episode, but really it's looking at improving your chances of following through by deciding exactly when, what, and where you're going to do that said thing. So the full implementation formula is I will behavior at time in location. And the more specific and almost sillily clear you get these, the better. Okay, right now we're going to transition from the summary and I'm going to explain how habits work. There's 4 steps. There's 4 processes in the habit loop. First, cue, then craving, then response and reward, and all over again. So a cue is simply a trigger to your brain. Your brain's always looking out there and scanning your environment to try to figure out what it should do, trying to predict how it can get something it desires or avoid something it doesn't desire. So a cue is simply something that your brain can see or hear or notice that tells it what to do. Craving is the next one. It's the motivational force behind every habit. Without craving something, a change, we have no motivation to act. Oftentimes, you don't crave the actual behavior, you crave the change in state. So like, for instance, when I go running, I don't necessarily crave the running, the moving my feet up a hill, but I definitely crave the change of state that I receive in during running and after running. Brushing your teeth is another good example. You don't really crave the idea of like putting toothpaste in your mouth and like brushing your teeth, but the experience after having clean teeth, that'd be a good example of the craving of the change in state that we desire. So every craving is linked to a desire to change your internal state. That's a key thing here. Okay, next, response. A response is the actual thing you do, the actual habit, either a thought or action. And if a response requires more energy, either mental or physical, than you're willing to expend to receive the craving, to satisfy the craving, then you won't do it. The other thing about a response is you actually have to have the ability to do it. So like if you want to paint a Monet and you don't have any paint, you probably won't do it. And we're going to go into the laws of behavior change in a little bit, and it's going to address some of these things. But really interesting because you're like, oh, wow, that makes total sense. Okay, last step, rewards. Rewards are the end goal of every habit. The cue is about wanting the reward. We chase rewards because they satisfy us and they teach us. And your brain, like I said, is not only predicting, it's a reward detector. It's constantly trying to figure out how to get what it wants, aka rewards. Rewards close the feedback loop and complete the habit cycle. So once we complete a reward, we're going to then go look for another cue to either get more reward or avoid what wasn't a reward. So all these steps together, they form what's called a neurological feedback loop. It goes cue, craving, response, reward, cue, craving, response, reward over and over again. So it ultimately allows you to create a habit. These 4 processes. So James has figured out a very clever way to transform these steps into a practical framework used to design good habits and eliminate old ones. He calls them the 4 laws of behavior change. So the first one is to make it obvious. The second one is to make it attractive. Next is making it easy. It's my favorite one. And last is making it satisfying. Today in this episode, we're going to drill down deep into making it obvious and attractive. And in the series episode, series 3 and the final of this series, we're going to go into making it easy and satisfying. So what's interesting, and I didn't really realize this the first time I read the book, but really the 4 laws directly correlate to each of the steps in the habit loop. So making it obvious is making the cue easier when obviously obvious. And I didn't really notice this the first time around. Making it attractive is increasing the craving, or it could also be the opposite, or decreasing the impact of an undesirable feeling. Making it easy goes back to the actual response and making that action easier to do. And then lastly, the reward, making that reward more satisfying. And so I don't know why I didn't realize this the first time around, but really his 4 laws just allow us to have some tangible ways to look at this feedback loop cycle, this neurological habit cycle, and figure out what was off in our system. So it's really just a very valuable awareness tool to go through these 4 laws to become aware of where we were not making it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. And when you tweak any one of those 4 categories, you're going to increase your ability to achieve what you want. And when we align ourselves with this habit process, these 4 areas, new and desirable habits will almost be effortless. I mean, think about it. If you make something so obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, and that just sounds so great. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. But if you're working against them, they'll be impossible. Like if you literally don't see the cue, that thing's not going to happen. Or if that cue is so hard to see, not going to happen. So any one of these 4 areas can be where we falter in a habit. And when you really look at them closely, it really does make anything feel so much more attainable. And I love that. So when we say something's important to us, but we just don't make time for it, we probably then go beat ourselves up. The answer is going to be found in one of these 4 laws above. Every goal is doomed to fail if it goes against the grain of our own human nature. Let's get into the 2 laws that we're going to cover today. The first one is making it obvious. So our greatest challenge in this area is maintaining awareness of what we were actually doing. Right? We go so much about our day in repeated patterns that we're not necessarily even aware that we're doing. And if we are aware, we don't necessarily evaluate them or consider if they're helping us or not helping us. And so becoming aware of what we're already doing is one way of making some habit obvious. And actually, James gives a great idea for this. He calls it a habit scorecard. So this is when you can kind of just like record what you're already doing. Like, let's just say your wake up routine. And you can decide if all the little steps that you do are positive, neutral, or maybe even negatively impacting you. So he gives an example of kind of just going about each step: waking up, snooze alarm, drink coffee, check phone, get dressed, brush teeth, make breakfast, and get kids dressed. It's kind of the simple pattern that I thought might look like some of your lives. And then you go through and you write a positive or a negative or equal for neutral on each one. Wake up, positive. Snooze alarm, I would say negative. Drink coffee, positive. Love coffee. Check phone, negative. Get dressed, neutral. Brush teeth, positive. Make breakfast, positive. Get kids dressed, I'd say positive. So the positives, yeah, you might want to leave those alone. Those are working for you. You like those habits that are already in place. The neutrals, again, you might look and see if you want to do something to make something a little bit more positive, or really focusing on where the negative is. Like, so for me, snoozing my alarm is something I do inconsistently. Sometimes I'm really great about just getting up right away, and sometimes I start to like really indulge in the snoozing. Sometimes I feel so good. But usually then it doesn't align with all of my other goals of what I have scheduled in the morning. And so I'd say that would be an area where I can look at making something a little bit more obvious, attractive, easy, or satisfying. So you can go through these and really ask yourself the question, does this habit or behavior, if it's looking at a certain thing, does this habit or behavior help me become the type of person I wish to be? Again, really going back to that root and identity. So the process of behavior change always starts with awareness. And the habit scorecard is an awareness tool. So the tool that I mentioned last episode and a little bit earlier in the summary today is the implementation intention. People who make a specific plan for when, where, and exactly what they'll perform are more likely to follow through. And most of you will think you lack motivation or willpower, but what you really lack here is clarity. The implementation builds in having something have that cue, right? So most commonly, cues are going to be based on time and location. And so by deciding a time and location and exactly what you're going to do ahead of time, you're making it more obvious. Some implementation intention examples would be, I will meditate for 1 minute at 7 a.m. in my kitchen. Or an exercise one could be, I will ride my bike for 30 minutes at 5 p.m. in my garage. So that would be obviously a stationary bike. Something in your marriage or relationship could be, I will make my partner a cup of tea at 8 a.m. in the kitchen. So the goal here is to make the time and location so obvious that with enough repetition, it's almost like when you get to the kitchen at 8 o'clock, you automatically make your partner a cup of tea. Another interesting thought about making something more obvious is the concept of habit stacking. So this is when you already have something in place, and then you can use that as your cue to stack something new on top. So say, for instance, you always drink coffee in the morning and you want to start to read. I always drink coffee in the morning. So you can say, when I drink my coffee in the morning, I will pick up my book and start reading. Something like that. Environment is also noted to be a very effective part of a cue. Behavior is commonly a function of a person in their environment. Many actions that we take each day are shaped not by a purposeful drive and choice, but really by a more obvious choice. So for this reason, we can have a very small change in what we see and a very big shift in what we actually do. There's some fun little examples here. So it's like, if you want to drink more water, put a bunch of water bottles or cups of water in all the rooms that you go in every day, right? So that visual cue of seeing water can be that small change that changes a lot of what you do. And for this reason, it can often be easier to build a new habit in a new environment. So it's like, if I get home every day and I go to my house, which I'm used to doing certain things at because of all the cues, then it's going to be a higher level. I'm going to have all those cues. So like, let's say, for instance, when I get home, it's not necessarily how my life goes, but I'm going to use the example. If I get home at a certain time every day and I'm used to then going to change into some more comfortable clothes and hang out with my kids, if I want to try to incorporate exercising into my day, my cues in my environment don't necessarily indicate that that's what I'm doing. But changing my environment might look like putting shoes and my workout clothes in my car so that when I get in my car to go home from work, I see them and I know that I'm going to stop on the way home and exercise before I get home. Right? So I'm actually not even going to enter the environment in which I don't exercise because the cues are so well ingrained. And so changing the environment, for instance, driving to a park, it's going to become more obvious what you want to do. And people, interestingly, because environment is so impactful, people with good habits tend to spend less time in tempting situations. It literally is easier for them to make good decisions. And so remember, every habit is initiated by a cue. If the cue is never noticed, the habit simply won't happen. And a lot of times when I'm doing awareness work with my clients, so say, for instance, noticing when you are thinking a certain thought, thinking the new thought is not as hard as remembering to think the new thought. So sometimes we'll use a visual cue like a rubber band or a special bracelet, not with the idea of like snapping it for punishment. I know that's something that a lot of people think about when you put a rubber band on your wrist, but really just having a visual cue to remember, to notice, and to generate maybe a new idea or new thought. There's so many fun ways that actually you can make something visible that isn't visible. And again, that's the most critical part because it's initiated. This new habit or practice is initiated by a cue. So if it doesn't become initiated, we don't even get a chance for the later parts of the new behavior. So another way of looking at this actually is inversion of the habit to make it invisible. So with the idea of maybe if you get home and there are cookies on your counter, that's an easy cue to eat the cookies. But actually having them not in your visual field, like having them put away or maybe even not in the house, that's making it invisible. Like you literally don't see them. So therefore the idea of craving them is much less likely to come into your mind. So self-control is a very short-term strategy, not a long-term run. And the secret to self-control is to make your cues of your good habits obvious and the cues to your bad or less desirable habits invisible. So fun, right? Okay, let's move on to making it attractive. This is really looking at how to make that, exaggerate that craving part of a habit. So how to make it more irresistible. It's almost like how to exaggerate the craving. It's remembering habits are dopamine driven. So dopamine is a hormone. We receive dopamine when our body perceives that we're doing something good or desirable. That's actually what makes it desirable is we receive that hit and it changes our state of being, even ever so slightly, and we can perceive that as a positive experience. Making it attractive looks like creating a situation where you get something you want. It's the anticipation. This part's really interesting to me. It's the anticipation of a reward that's the most powerful because that's what gets us into action. It made me think of like when I start to think about a coffee drink, a special like Starbucks treat, or even like a milkshake. When you start to think about the experience of drinking the coffee and then having that energy or the enjoyment of having a milkshake. I mean, have you guys had Chick-fil-A's milkshakes? Those are so good. So when you start to think about that and you anticipate the pleasure, the attractiveness of that, that's what creates you moving towards that Starbucks or that Chick-fil-A, getting in that line at the drive-thru. They make it so easy, which is interesting because we'll look at that in our next episode. So it's actually the anticipation of the reward, not the actual reward, that gets us into action. And that's important because when we are making something more attractive, the idea is all we need to do is to get into action, is to anticipate something that's good is going to happen. So the other thing you can do is you can pair a new habit with something that's already attractive. So something that's already attractive for me is drinking my coffee in the morning. And let's just say if I wanted to start a journaling habit in the morning, and what I was currently doing is something that I really enjoyed, which was scrolling on my phone. That might look like, okay, I'm going to journal for 5 minutes before I scroll on my phone, because that scrolling on your phone is the attractive thing. And so you can just pair it to make it more attractive, to anticipate that once you do this one thing, you can do the thing that you already like. Okay, let's talk about the role of family and friends in shaping your habits. This part I think is really fascinating, especially as it relates to us moms. The pull of social norms. We imitate what we see around us. So proximity has a powerful effect on our behavior for both the physical environment and the social environment. So we talked a little bit about the physical environment a little bit ago, but now I want to take a closer look at the social environment. So this is the impact of the family, friends, and community you have. And so if you see 0 moms of special needs kids around you that are living fulfilled, non-stressful, enjoyable lives, then it's very likely you're going to be imitating people around you that are not creating those things. So we tend to imitate the habits of 3 social groups. The close, these are our family and friends. The many, this is the people in our community, our tribe and culture. The powerful, those with status and prestige. And so therefore, one of the most powerful things you can do is join a culture where your desired behavior is the norm of the group. And 2, you already have something in common with the group. This part really, really stuck out to me because I think our common bond here is that we're moms with special needs kids. And what I love about it is that because I don't talk about any one specific diagnosis, there's literally so many we can't even count the way that we can experience being moms of special needs children. And so by joining a culture that has the desired behavior as the norm, like we're our people here. This is our people. And by becoming closer to people that are taking on the desired behaviors of being happy, being fulfilled, taking back control of their life, that is one of the most powerful things you can do to impact your habits. And then, of course, we already talked about how that influences our identity and so forth. And so just the way that social psychology works is that the normal behavior of the tribe often overpowers the desired behavior of the individual. Most days we'd rather be wrong with the crowd than be right by ourselves. And James Clear, the author, he talks about some experiments where they essentially have actors and they set people up to basically be doing simple tasks. At first, it starts out that everyone just does the right answer. You know, like it's like saying a line is longer than another one. So something so obvious. And then the more and more actors they put in the group that actually intentionally give the wrong answer and saying a line that is actually shorter is longer than another, then the odds and chances of the person that's the test subject of literally going against what they know to be true and aligning with the group. And so that's the power that our desire to be with the crowd has on us. And I think when I look at this one specifically, I think about the setup that we already have as special needs moms, that we're already kind of outside of the crowd because of a variety of reasons. Maybe it's just simply because we're off at appointments when other people are doing other things that we consider more norm or more desirable even. Or even just because the way that our children work, it just doesn't allow us to physically be with our people. Like I think about something that I remember from years ago is some friends, hey, let's go do a hike in our area. There's some really pretty hills and Torrey pines right by the beach. It overlooks the ocean. It's just amazing. And it was a very simple thing, right? Like most anybody can go do this, except for if you have a child with a physical disability that's too big to carry. And so even just that kind of thing, right? Like my desire to be with a crowd, of course, is high. I'm as human as anybody else. And so I think we already have this setup where we're being separated from the crowd as special needs moms. And so I think that is part of my mission and my dream, is to actually create a new crowd where we as special needs moms, yes, we still have to go to all the appointments, but we now have a community that we see around us that actually are doing the behaviors that we desire. We're taking extraordinary care of ourselves. We're having our own back. We're celebrating our wins. We are having our own habits. We're having our own interesting lives. We're showing up for our kids with unconditional love and supporting them and not being attached to the outcome, but we're cheering along and we're relating to them as their highest and their best. And we're advocating for them and we're processing our emotions so we're not exploding on people around us. This is the community, essentially, that I think my vision is to create so that we are the social norm around us. That we don't have zero people in our sphere that are having the desired behaviors, the desired identities. And it really goes back to changing the narrative, because lastly on this point is that if a behavior can get us approval, respect, praise, we often find it attractive. And I think right now, because our society doesn't yet prioritize some of the behaviors that our children have with respect and praise and attractiveness. And oftentimes we associate ourselves with that behavior. And therefore, it puts us in a really undesirable position. And it almost puts us against our child. And so even just making something more acceptable can make it more attractive. And so I think it's like it both starts with us, but it also is a part of changing our community. So again, I think it can build on each other. It's not just one or the other necessarily. I think it can happen that way. But I think if we want to make something just more attractive by looking at it through the lens of this habit conversation, I think it's changing both. How to find and fix the causes of our bad habits. Well, first it's understanding that our cravings, really what is making something more or less attractive, all come from very basic things. Things like conserving energy, getting food and water, finding love, and maybe the ability to reproduce, connecting and bonding with others, winning social acceptance and approval, reducing uncertainty, and sometimes achieving status and prestige. So these are all where our cravings come from. If you really look at, they all go back to those fundamental, very simple things. I think sometimes I'm like, is it really as simple as that? Yeah, like it is actually as simple as that. That we can trace anything that we desired, anything that we crave, we can trace back to very likely one of those 7 things. And so habits are all about associations. Our brain is constantly trying to predict what's going to happen and steer us towards something more desirable or away from something less desirable. The prediction leads to a feeling, which is how your body interprets what it should do and leads you to action or inaction. Habits are attractive when we associate them to positive feelings. So really the game is, in this, as we wrap up this section, if habits are attractive when we associate them with positive feelings, the game is to find ways to associate them. That's how we make it more attractive. And we are going to wrap up this episode there. We're going to wait for the rest of the laws of behavior change for next week's episode. And I just want you to remember that the problem is not you, it's your system. This is one of the things that James says, and I love it. Because we look at the things we're not doing and we think, man, if only I was stronger, smarter, more self-controlled. And I think the more we look at this, we realize that that actually is not the problem at all. It's that we actually have systems that are not supporting us. We don't have a structure to make it easy. We don't have a system to make it more attractive. We're not aware of what would even make it more attractive. And so this week, as you go to apply this, I want you to create another implementation intention. Maybe it's actually looking at the implementation intention that you thought of last time. And one, if you did it, yay. Maybe it's just doing it again. If you set an intention but didn't do it, take another look. Take a look and see if you can make it more obvious or more attractive. Apply the points here and see if you can see what the gap was in actually taking the action on the habit that you want to create. And lastly, before we wrap up, I want to tell you about a place of belonging, a place where actually you can have the conversations about who you want to be as a mom and have a community that supports you in creating the social norm of being a really happy special needs mom. A really content special needs mom, a mom that has peace and feels in control. And the community I've created is through a group coaching program called Being Mom Together. And it's open in enrollment right now. And I've created a structure that we both get to learn together, but more importantly, we get to implement together. We get to take action together. We get to actually create these neurological feedback loops together so that we can have a different experience. Remember, so the craving is having a desire to have a different state of being, a state of physical being, because it all loops back to that, how we feel in our bodies. We get to do that together. And so I invite you to this group. I invite you to do a consultation, which is just where you get to look at what you desire and to see if it aligns with what this group offers. All you need to do that, to schedule that time with me, is to click on the show notes, and there'll be a very obvious link of where to click and where to sign up. I really look forward to the last series in this episode. I know it's a lot of information. I know it's really throwing a lot at you. So it might be the kind of thing where you have to go listen to it again to absorb it. And if you are just like, wow, I really want more, I want to drill down, definitely read James's book. It's amazing. And I just can't wait to connect with you. Thank you for being with me again and being part of my special needs community and my place of belonging. We'll see you next week. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.